Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Our next letter comes from Harry. So Harry writes, I've been married to Gabby since 2016. We've had our fair share of struggles, the biggest being her move to the US. We've dealt with our issues with couples therapy, individual therapy on my part. I've worked through physical abuse I experienced as a child and PTSD anger issues stemming from my military service. We separated in 2022 for a few months, but got back together and we remain committed to each other. I love that we're always willing to work on our issues instead of just leaving. But this story is not about her. That's just some background. In May 2023, Gabby changed careers to my field of work, but had to do 6 months of remote training. We made it work, though I felt that my emotional needs were not being met. Oh dear. In June, I attended a multi-week training out of state where I met Cindy. We hit it off immediately. We shared many interests and always ended up talking one-on-one in class or when people from the group would hang out afterwards. Oh dear. Yeah, I can sort of predict that if you weren't getting your emotional needs met and you've already gone through some significant challenges, regardless, like I can understand for you, Harry, that like this could have been the start of a perfect storm where Cindy, if Cindy was someone you could really lean on, she may have been someone where you started to, get quite deep and close and intimate with. And I could understand if this started to, let's just say it may have caused things to go a little bit pear-shaped in your relationship with Gabby. So, yeah, keen to see where this all goes because this is already starting off in a very, your letter to me is very different from what I've normally read out thus far. So let's keep going. One time hanging out at a bar, Cindy mentioned that she'd quit drinking. Now, I didn't pressure her to drink, but out of curiosity, I asked why. She told me she quit because after she and her ex-boyfriend were drunk, he'd physically assaulted her. One day, Cindy invited Gabby and I on a trip to Asia later in the year, but I declined because Gabby wouldn't have part-time off by then. At the end of the training, Cindy told me she really liked me and we promised to stay in touch. I told Gabby about and Gabby was fine with the situation initially. Since Cindy was also in our field of work, I thought Cindy could be a mentor to Gabby. I also wanted them to become friends because they have a lot of things in common. They're from the same part of the world, had some of the same struggles with their families, and both claim to have issues making friends. Fair enough. Already, Harry, I feel like you're the kind of guy who's, very generous, someone who probably has a big heart and wants people to get on. And I wouldn't be surprised if you probably have very strong paternal energy, meaning that you're very good at looking out for those who are struggling. but I almost wonder if that part of you gets into a little bit of trouble where you tend to maybe overextend yourself to the downtrodden and have problems with boundaries from time to time. But speculation aside, let's keep going. After the training, I invited Cindy to a holiday trip to my state. I did to be nice since she'd had invited Gabby and I on a trip, and that's fair enough. I wasn't expecting her to accept, but surprisingly, she agreed and flew out to meet me and some of my friends. We had a great time. I did a few things I had never done, and I felt like we bonded well. Cindy's relationship status came up, and she told me that she was on a break, which wasn't the first, with her current boyfriend, but that it was her longest relationship ever at around 2 years. After, I told Gabby everything about the trip, and while she claimed she wasn't jealous, she was upset that I had done some things without her, but we worked through it. I love the fact that you're talking with Gabby throughout all of this, Harry. Like, seriously, I'll give you credit for that. Like, you're doing a really good job of actually just keeping Gabby through in a loop with all of this, in spite of the fact that I feel like, it does sound like 2023 must have been challenging considering you weren't getting your emotional needs met due to the distance because of training. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think that you are navigating this well in that department, in spite of the fact that I wouldn't be surprised if Cindy throws a few spanners in the work. In the months that followed, Cindy and I kept in touch. I learned more about the previously mentioned relationship she was experiencing. She confided in me about her boyfriend's physically and emotionally abusive behavior. Highlights of this are he was the one that attacked her and caused her to stop drinking. Also, one time he called her late at night, suicidal, threatening to shoot himself and his dog while she was on an out of state training. Disconcertingly, she claimed that this was the best relationship she ever had. Red flag city right there. I sent her several resources regarding intimate partner violence and told her I'd be there for her if need be. In late September, she claimed that she had totally cut off the guy and our texting accelerated and we got closer. Okay, we're going to take a massive pause here. That is like red flag city right there. Let me take a moment here to say, generally speaking, people who have a fearful avoidant attachment style have a unfortunate habit due to all the terrible experiences they've had growing up to find themselves in pretty abusive relationships. And it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is for them tolerable to be with the intolerable. And because often their self-worth is through the floor, and they often feel pretty awful about themselves because of all the horrible experiences they've gone through, which is, not their fault. They often, feel a degree of comfortability, being with people who treat them terribly because they often feel like, well, it's no big deal if this relationship were to end because it doesn't really mean much if I'm already feeling like a piece of shit, if I'm, being dragged by someone similar to me who really cares. But this is when things become very dangerous for them because they often stick it out in these relationships, which are quite awful for them. And it's their comfort zone too, psychologically, from challenging themselves to be in much healthier relationships. Because if you were to be with someone more secure as a fearful avoidant, this is when things become very challenging for them. This is when, and I learned this the other day actually from someone who identifies with a fearful avoidant attachment style, and what they shared was just so insightful, and I'm very grateful for them sharing this. They were saying one of the biggest wounds a fearful avoidant will face when getting into a more secure relationship with someone who may not necessarily be secure in their attachment style, but they're basically just working to create that security, is that uh, one of the biggest fears that fearful avoidants have is feeling unlovable and feeling, like if I were to date you, you who treat me so well, you who don't even make me, work to be loved, you who make me feel safe, seen, and heard. If I were to lose you, then that would crush me because it would show how unworthy and how awful I already am. And it would almost be fulfilling a deep-seated fear that I am just unlovable and I'm unworthy. And that's when the avoidance sort of parts start to kick in for some fearful avoidance where they start to push their partners away. And, this wounding can coexist with all the other usual ones we know about, like wanting to have space, independence, but usually for fearful avoidance, there's also, the betrayal wound, the shame, there's a lot going on. And a lot of that self-protective, behavior is about, trying to avoid being rejected for being, a piece of shit, essentially. So, what does this all mean for you, Harry, in this experience? Well, like I said before, you give me paternal vibes, and a lot of, fearful avoidance, particularly women in heteronormative relationships, often have had a lot of unavailable fathers, emotionally speaking. So they can actually get on very well with paternal figures, men who are very kind, generous, loving, but they may eventually get to a point where their avoidant behavior starts to kick in and they become quite erratic and defensive and maybe even start to degrade you. And they do it as a part of self-protection to try and, eject themselves out of these relationships. But I wouldn't be surprised if she's found you very affirming and very loving because of how, seemingly, warm you are based on what I'm reading thus far. But I predict there's going to be some instability. So let's keep going. Cindy shared her struggles with self-esteem stemming from her childhood. She shared how emotionally neglectful her father had been. Well, there you go. And I hadn't read this beforehand. And how she didn't care at all when he died. How her mother got sick while pregnant with her, and how that sickness was blamed on Sydney by her parents and sisters up until her mother passed away. Yeah, so Cindy has existed in a pretty disgusting background where she's been blamed for an illness that she hasn't caused, and her dad is someone she just didn't really care about when he died. So this is already sounding like the recipe for abuse, emotional neglect. Poor girl. I feel sorry for her. And I can see here, Harry writes, I felt a deep sense of empathy for her and suggested therapy and shared resources that had helped me through my own healing journey. You're very generous. I would say, though, that if going back to Red Flag City, though, to me, when I read that, I'm like, this is someone who's not ready for a secure relationship. Like, Cindy needs so much therapy to work on her defensiveness if she was to get into a relationship with someone like you, from what I'm reading. But, anyways, let's keep going. Aside from labeling her abusive relationship as the best she's ever had, other things that illustrated her rock bottom self-esteem were how she never wears a seatbelt while in a car and how she doesn't like to use protection during sex. Okay, so she likes to take risks. So that suggests to me that she is someone who probably wants to have a lot of freedom from control. She's probably the kind of girl who likes to fly at the edge of a seat, not just in the car, but in like all aspects of her life as well too. And I suspect this is her. It's a theme that I don't talk about a lot, but with my clients I do. It's this concept of like rebellion, which is where you take risky behavior as a bit of a fuck you to your parents. Classic example, if you were financially controlled as a child, you're an overspender in life and you like spending, even if you know it's not necessarily good for you and your savings, you do it as a bit of a fuck you from being controlled as a kid. So that's sort of the vibe that I'm getting. So she obviously engages in very risky behavior, not probably great and healthy. As we talked more, I gave her more and more compliments and was very supportive to try and help her with her self-esteem. Oh dear, and did this backfire? And she reciprocated by expressing her appreciation for me, calling me the smartest friend she had and complimenting my appearance more and more, since one of our shared interests was getting back into shape and we would challenge each other with workouts and fitness challenges. We also planned a big trip to South America for Cindy's birthday in May. Wow, you both sound like you're going out together. However, there were moments where she dismissed or invalidated my feelings and efforts, which began to make me feel anxious, but I dismissed those feelings and just wrote it off to a self-admitted bad communication. The first time that I was vulnerable with her, I told her I really appreciated our friendship because I hadn't had a woman platonic friend since I'd lost contact with one in 2020. She replied by cynically thinking we will lose touch at some point because that's what happens with all my friendships. I replied by saying that I would manage my expectations, but that I would try to make it work as long as she wanted to which she replied by changing the topic. Oh dear. Okay. So a lot of fearful avoidants have very pejorative views about relationships, saying things like they're all going to end. They typically also have views around loss and longevity, where it goes along the lines of, like, oh, life is short. We're all going to die one day. And yet it's ironic because even though they can often say that with a straight face, they're often very opposed to loss and they're not very good at handling grief. And so, even when I'm hearing you share all of this, Harry, it just makes me think, yeah, it just almost sounds like she's got this like real defensive part of her that comes up, hearing this and doesn't want to hear the fact that there could be loss here that she'd have to feel. And I feel like that's coming up because even if she were to discard you in the future, like by doing an avoidant breakup with you, if you will, I suspect that she's probably got these very strong defensive parts, like, well, that's just how it is. Friendships all, end at some point. Relationships all end in divorce or whatever it may be, that story that she has in her head. I suspect that's the story she tells herself to give her comfort because another big wound that a lot of fearful avoidants have is I'm going to lose people and that I will be unable to deal with the amount of grief that I would have to feel if I were to lose this connection. Fascinating stuff that I'm learning through this relationship OCD course that I'm doing. That's really going into the heart of a lot of fears that people with a disorganized or a fearful avoidant attachment have. And yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. But yeah, this to me is already setting the scene for what's going to come up next. And oh, have I repeated myself? No, I haven't. Okay. Um, in late October, Gabby came back home, but it was hectic balancing the friendship with Cindy and my relationship with Gabby. Yeah, I bet it was. I was texting Cindy hundreds of times a day, spending hours playing online games with her, spending hours in the gym, and working full time. Bro, you've got a full-blown romantic relationship going on inside your romantic relationship. Gabby never brought it up, but I admittedly was focusing too much on the friendship with Cindy. And like you said in one of your podcast episodes, it started becoming this weird more than friends thing. Yeah, I can tell. One time, Cindy sent me a picture packing for a trip. I mentioned something about it, and she made this joke about me having a foot fetish because her bare foot was in view. I leaned into the joke and she proceeded to send me more feet pics. After that, she started sending me pics that were slightly risque, and our humor turned more and more sexual. Okay, so up there with the risky behavior. This is a girl who likes to be promiscuous because she thinks this is her way of building connection. I probably should have set a boundary, but I admit I like the attention, especially since I think that Cindy is more attractive than I am. Okay, so Harry, I'm gonna just say gently, fair enough. I respect that. And I could understand that maybe this for you is filling a little hole that you might have not had filled, and that's totally fair. Been there, done that, signed that box off many years ago. I know what that's like, so I get it. But I do think just be mindful that, you're in a relationship with Gabby and that sort of, those emotional gaps, which I've worked with a few straight couples before where the guy has had experiences like this, where, and women too have also experienced this too, I should say. It's not just men, but usually some of those things inside of us that haven't been filled or self-esteem issues or things where we don't feel good enough can often lead us to being very vulnerable to these sort of dynamics. So you're definitely treading on relationship blurring lines here, meaning romantic relationship blurring lines here with Cindy. But at the same time, out of respect to you, I don't want to judge you because, I'm trying to be on your side with this entire thing too. So, and by the way, anyone who's listening to this, if you have your own sort of thoughts and feelings on this, I totally get it. But I don't want to, I'm not trying to come at this and attack, Harry for this because I do feel like so many people go through these situations. We all come in with our own baggage and our own stuff. And I know it's very easy to point fingers being like, you motherfucker for doing X, Y, Z. How could you do this? But the reality is that, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Is that an excuse for this sort of behavior? You can be the judge of that. I'm here really just trying to unpack a story. But in any case, these things, unfortunately, they happen. In October, I saw stories that my favorite band might stop touring, so I looked for tickets, and coincidentally, they had an upcoming concert in Cindy City. I bought 2 tickets, and I asked Gabby to ask for the days off and told Cindy that we would be heading that way in November. Cindy volunteered to host us and was excited to see me in person. Sadly, Gabby didn't have enough PTO, so I went alone. During this visit with Cindy, some things happened that I think led up to what happened later. Cindy said that she would not go to the concert because it wasn't her type of music, but she changed her mind after I couldn't sell my other ticket. The day before I flew out, Cindy told me that she loved me on our work chat app. I avoided replying and didn't reciprocate since the app is monitored. Oh dear, she's probably going to flip out over that internally. I didn't change the plan to stay with Cindy. The first night there, I went to my guest room. We were going to play an online game, so I thought Cindy would be in her room. Instead, she came to my room and just jumped into bed with me. I got the vibe that I wanted to sleep with Cindy. She would have been into it, but while I didn't vocalize anything, I made it clear by my body language that I wasn't going to try anything. I also raised the issue that sometimes I felt unheard when when she wouldn't respond to things I would text, to which she claimed that she would try better. Finally, the last night I was there, we went out to dinner and I made a dumb joke that if I got too drunk, I might hit on her. She replied that I shouldn't because of Gabby, but then she kept buying me drinks and kept asking me if I was drunk yet. In any case, after I was a bit drunk, the topic of our past traumas came up. I think I pushed her a little too hard because she kept trying to change the topic and I kept changing it back. At one point, she started crying and I had to console her when she was talking about her mum. On the drive back, I told her I was proud of her for opening up and that I loved her as a friend. When we got back, she really didn't say much and we just ended the night. Can I just say, Harry, like as I was reading that, I can really feel like you guys got very close there. Like you really both sound like you've bonded very deeply. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is probably the first time she's been with someone who's just listened to her without punishment. But I also think too, even Cindy's behavior, like Cindy has no boundaries. She's really challenging the boundaries between you and Gabby. And it's no surprise to me that she's doing this because if you think about it, you guys are married. You know, it's actually safer for her to try and achieve a relationship with you because you're not open to a relationship with a person outside of your marriage, right? So, in a way, I'm not surprised that some of these more typical avoidant deactivation strategies haven't happened just yet because you're in a romantic relationship with Gabby, and this is very self-defeating behavior on her part. But my God, I feel like as I'm reading this, I'm like, the chemistry is practically dripping from this letter. It's like, guys, like part of me is like, get it on with it. But I know obviously for very boundary reasons you haven't done that. So good on you. But at the same time, like I can really feel the chemistry ratcheting it up. By the way, please take that little part of me saying get on with it, not as literal, don't ever do that to break the sanctity of your relationships, but I'm just saying, like, it really does feel like things are heating up. When I came home, things were okay for a few days. Then communication started dropping. Ah, here we go. I brought it up, and Sydney claimed that she was just tired. We stopped playing online. She was tired. I tried calling, still tired. I sent her an email asking for some clarification and asking if something had happened during my visit to drive us apart. And that since I can't read minds, she could feel free and safe to bring it up because I really valued our friendship. Cindy replied that I was being annoying, that I wasn't listening to her, and that she didn't know what else to do to reassure me that things were fine, even though she'd only been claiming that she was tired. Okay, there comes the avoidance side. Eventually, she said that that she shouldn't remain in daily contact, but could still be casual friends due to how much I was annoying her. She then started taking hours to days to reply. I began to look online for a solution and ran into attachment theory. I began to think she was avoidant, and I had to go back to therapy to deal with the anxiety that this was all causing me. I bet it was. And you're in a tricky position too, because you're also in a relationship. Around Christmas, I told her how hurtful this dynamic was and brought up attachment theory and how I thought she was avoidant. She told me that I was being an asshole diagnosing her and that she was done talking about our friendship. In the coming months, communication practically stopped. I sent Cindy a couple of gifts here and there, trying to pay her back for a really expensive birthday gift she dropped. See, she gave, trying to pay her back for a really expensive birthday gift she got me when I visited. She told me at points how she appreciated that I kept trying, but she never really made efforts to improve things. In April, she began to talk to me more and things improved. We went on our trip in May. Things went well, but we only saw each other for 5 days. Cindy and Gabby finally met. Oh my God, they've now finally met? Jesus Christ. Cindy and Gabby finally met, but didn't really take to each other. I asked Cindy if she had started talking to me again due to the trip or due to anything I'd done. She said that she didn't want to keep being an asshole because I kept trying to be friends. Oh, so she knows that she was being an asshole. That's interesting. I also told her that I had kind of figured out that she would get triggered whenever I brought up emotions or feelings, and she told me that she didn't feel anything. In the alexithymia sense, pretty much confirming my sense that she was a fearful avoidant. Oh, yeah, 100%. In June, Cindy told me she was talking and seeing her abusive ex again. Oh dear, whom she now claimed wasn't abusive. Denial. I really resented all that effort I'd put in trying to help her. I asked if anything had changed, and she told me that it was because he was the only person she had in the area, despite telling me at one point that she would rather be alone than put up with any of my shit. At this point, I was so over it, so I told her to be careful and left the topic of her ex alone. This is a really good example of classic self-sabotaging behavior. You know, this is her rejecting you and also trying to get out of Dodge so that way she doesn't feel unlovable. And she's going back to someone who already makes her feel psychologically safe, even though they're terribly abusive. And even that story of like, oh, he's not abusive, it's just denial, rationalizing. She's trying to essentially convince herself of a narrative that you two, aren't good together. She's had to put up with so much shit from you. She's projecting as well, too. This is all defensive stuff, but it's so cruel to you because you have tried, like I said, in a very paternal way, to dote on her, to give her not only kindness and love and reciprocity, but also you've been very generous in your resources with her, Harry. You've really tried to give her access to support for intimate partner violence. You've been, as boundaried as I suppose you could be in certain situations. You still definitely need to work on your boundaries a lot, but it's so not fair what she's done, given the fact that I understand this is definitely in the realm of emotional cheating. I'm very well aware of that. But if we put all of that to one side, because I don't want to necessarily, you know, go into that aspect so much, I want to take a moment just to say, I really feel like for Harry, because I work with a lot of cases like this, I really feel like, Cindy was a bit of your lifeline during probably this time when Gabby was away and was doing her training. Like, I really feel as though, she was someone you were really bonding with. And as you mentioned, you've had situations where female friends have just fiddled out and not worked out. So I can understand wanting to try and have a real earnest smash at this. And it sounds like you and Cindy have really bonded. So, I think this has become a situation where there has been a genuine connection here, and it's been really quite beautiful between the two of you. But then her defensiveness just came up, and clearly she was pushing your boundaries so much with this entire thing. Had a vulnerability hangover when, you got close, and then her walls started going up. So, yeah, this is complicated. And I want to take a moment here to say, like I was saying before, putting the emotional affair piece to one side. Listen, for those of you who've been through affairs on the receiving end of it, I know it's fucking devastating and it hurts. There's no but from me coming. I know it's really, really, really painful. It's brutal and it destroys people, and some people never recover from that. Full stop. For the purposes of this letter reading, I don't want to indict Harry. I just want to go through this experience because I know so many people who I work with who are in Harry's shoes, who have been in not just emotional, but physical affairs with avoidant attachers. And this stuff can be bloody confusing and difficult. And it's not necessarily because, people who are in Harry's shoes don't love the partner they're with. It could be for a variety of reasons. And this stuff just still happens. I remember I worked with a client ages ago, very similar to Harry's situation. There was distance between them. They weren't getting their emotional needs met. An avoidant coworker came along, and one thing led to another, and they had to navigate, the rupture in the relationship. Affairs happen a lot in attachment injury. So, just want to say to those of you who are navigating this and are in the position of Harry, this stuff happens more often than you probably care to think. And I work with a lot of people on this on either side, and it's pretty fucking gnarly on both sides for different reasons. So, I understand I'm playing Switzerland here a little bit with this, but, you know, all I can say is I can see both sides of it. Anyways, and lastly, you don't have to agree with my views on this. I'm not asking anyone to empathize with Harry if you can't. Not asking you to necessarily, be on board with what's going on here. That's neither here nor there. These situations just happen. Anyways, moving on. Blah. Around this time, Gabby and I had some issues with a temporary relocation for work, and I asked Cindy for some emotional support and requested some increased communication from her. This triggered her, and she essentially stopped initiating any contact, and what remained became really superficial. I worked things out with Gabby and tried to keep things going with Cindy, but to be honest, I was pretty tired of the dynamic. I bet you were. In October, I had enough of the superficial low contact, and I sent Cindy an email explaining that rather than keep triggering her by asking her yet again for some more effort, which can I say, Harry, bare minimum effort, I would just let her go, and I wrote a list of things that I felt she should work on, all of which she had mentioned before as faults, things that she was aware of. She replied admitting that she had stopped trying and putting in an effort a while back due to how exhausting my bids for more communication were, but said that it was nice meeting me and that it was fun while it lasted, and that was that. What bluster? What confounding, dismissiveness is that, right? Like to me, it just seems like she's written that off without wanting to sit with the loss that she actually created in this dynamic as well, too. She needs so much work in order to, be in a healthier relationship. She just sounds like she's a roller coaster. Like, I feel sorry for her a lot. I really do. But I also feel very sorry for you, Harry. I feel sorry for Gabby as well, too, in some ways, I suppose, as well. Um, but yeah, like this is tricky. It's not like, as I said, like even though you and Gabby have been navigating some difficult stuff together with relocation, issues in the past, PTSD, anger issues, got to give you both credit where it's due. You've been really committed to each other and trying to work through this. But, it sounds like it's been, very challenging how you've had a few bumps in the road, including this particular instance as well, too. Like, I mean, I have to say, you haven't had it easy. And I can imagine this has been very challenging on both you and Gabby. Anyways, Harrier concludes, I feel like an idiot that I invested so much time and effort into someone that couldn't reciprocate it and that I should have instead invested into my marriage. At least I was smart enough not to ruin my marriage by cheating, agreed, even if things flirted on the edge of an emotional affair. So I deserve whatever criticism you throw my way for that. Like I've said consistently, Harry, throughout this entire piece, I'm not about to indict you in front of an entire, audience, whether they listen or watch this on social media. I'll save that for, other people. Listen, what I would say is this, you know, it's hard, being in this situation. And I could say, well, you had it coming because you were emotionally lonely when there was distance created due to the work situation. But unfortunately, I sort of see it as sometimes this shit happens. And I know it's going to be a very hand wavy comment for a lot of people, and they're not going to love me saying that. Listen, if you were my client and you've been on the receiving end, I'd speak to you differently. You already sound like you're probably in a lot of shame about, how things got emotionally, close to being an emotional affair. Yeah, even though I said it was an emotional affair. Look, I can understand you're probably sitting with a lot of shame over this and also feeling quite hurt and betrayed by the loss of Cindy. It's a double whammy. It's a lot to deal with. And you could be feeling like a complete idiot because you let someone get close who you thought could be a great friend and then it turned into shit. I got to give you credit where it's due, though. You and Cindy obviously hit it off, and you obviously sound like someone who does require a lot of warmth, connection, love, and validation, which is very valid. We all do. And I think it sounds like, maybe this is something for you and Gabby to definitely work on because you realize you can't do distance without it causing some serious ruptures in the relationship. And it's not Gabby's fault. It's just a thing where maybe you've realized your limit and that when these limits, are met, you are more prone to being very vulnerable to the Cindys of the world. And then I also want to say, I think wanting female friends is very normal, valid, fair, and I think it's actually very healthy for you. I think that, you know, coming at this from a place of vulnerability, of being emotionally, vulnerable, wanting reassurance, wanting more connectivity, love, like you've been, Harry, I think puts you in a very vulnerable position where you might be more easily exposed to the Cindys of the world, so to speak. And I got to tell you, Cindy seemed to move hot and fast with you. And I think your nervous system probably really appreciated the closeness, but things just escalated and ramped up real quick. And I think that Cindy definitely, you shared something really, amazing. And she just, in her defensiveness, threw it away into the wind to get back with her comfort zone. And it's just sad for everyone involved. So I'm really sorry that you've all gone through this because this just sounds like it's a bit of a Shakespeare play where nobody wins. Maybe that's actually a Chekhov story. I don't know. But nevertheless, like I said, I don't want to beat down on you too hard for this because like I said, I've worked with a lot of men and women who've been in your shoes, and you're already going through enough shame. I'm not here to add to that bus, so to speak. Shame's shit. So I think you already know that you want to do better. I would definitely say, as giving you some counseling feedback, not that you really asked for it, but I'd say you definitely need to work on your boundaries. Definitely need to work on some wounding around love and abandonment because it sounds like there's a lot there. And I say that because you're someone who's obviously very overly generous. And even though you did an excellent job of not taking this relationship to a physical level, you've got big emotional gaps that you need to be filled. And you deserve to have them filled because you sound like a lovely guy and you sound like someone who definitely needs, to get some love there too. By love, I mean you really need to work on those parts of yourself that have been feeling neglected, that have felt overlooked, ignored. I wouldn't be surprised if you're the kind of guy who's actually been very good as a bit of a caretaker for people in your life. I wouldn't be surprised if you've been very good with, you know, maybe even your caregivers and being very adult and mature in a lot of your relationships, even with your parents. But yeah, you definitely need to learn your boundaries with people like Cindy, because there's plenty of people like that out there. All right, Harry, thank you for what has been not only a very complex letter, but also a very, emotionally engaging letter. Like I really enjoyed, reading that out. I know, like I said, everyone's got to come at this with a different opinion of their own about, this story. It's, like I said, complex, but I really enjoyed reading it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys for the next letter reading very soon.